It's time for an interview I'm really excited about in the Virtual Biohacking Conference today. And it is with Gabby Bernstein. And Gabby is just a really interesting, powerful human being. And for about 20 years, she's called herself a spirit junkie, and she's been helping people change their lives. And she's really open about changing her own life. And she helps people manifest the life they want. And you could say, Dave, this is a biohacking conference. What do you mean about manifesting? Look, biohacking is how do you get results? You don't have to know everything inside the black box. And I'll tell you, Gabby gets results. She's a #1 New York Times bestselling author with 8 books under her belt, including The Universe Has Your Back, Judgment Detox, Super Attractor, and a book that just came out as an Audible original called You Are the Guru. You'll see her all over TV, national TV shows. She teaches meditation and Kundalini yoga. And since live events aren't really that popular in 2020, mostly for legal reasons, she's connecting to her community through books, through her Miracle membership, an app she actually created called Spirit Junkie. And you'll find her all over the place, including digital workshops, e-courses, masterclasses. In other words, if you like what you see in the conference today from her, she's got tons more for you. And this melding and this mending of science and personal development is really important for where we're going. And what we're going to talk about today is spiritual resilience, which is different than biological resilience. And actually, Gabby, tell me, is it different? I mean, if you're biologically resilient, will you be spiritually resilient?
I think if you're spiritually resilient, you can become biologically resilient. I believe that. Actually, not that I think that. I know that. I know that when we have a spiritual shift, we can begin to notice shifts in our nervous system. And as a result, the biology shifts, right? So I definitely think they go hand in hand, 100%.
And I've gotten to the point where I feel like it's one of those, pushing on a string, or the snake eating its tail, which is called an Ouroboros, which is a common spiritual thing. Have you ever seen that? It's like a Viking symbol, but it's also in Egypt and all. Yep. But it's kind of meant to be the circle of life, where you have that circle. And it's interesting because if you don't have enough energy, it's hard to turn on that spiritual energy. But if your spiritual energy is broken, it's hard to turn on the physical energy. So you're like, which is it? Like, where does it start? Is it the chicken or the egg sort of thing? Do you have clients, or in your own experience, something you can share about someone who got their spiritual side in order with profound physical effects?
Yes, I can speak to myself ultimately, really. Yeah. If it's 15 years ago, literally right now, I'm just in the midst of celebrating 15 years of sobriety. And in my early recovery, I began to notice that my physical condition, of course, was changing, not just because I put down drinks and drugs, but because I was feeling more emotionally resilient, more spiritually resilient. And in the 15 years of my recovery, I've developed and established a very steadfast, committed spiritual foundation. And as I continue to develop that foundational truth within myself, practices that I apply daily, my physical condition has greatly benefited. I feel physically better. I'm in better shape than I was 20 years ago. I mentally have never been happier in my life. For decades, I struggled with gastro issues. I had SIBO, I had Candida, you name the freaking gastro issue. I am an expert. Yeah. But we know where that comes from, right? That comes from unresolved trauma. That comes from living in fight, flight, living in a way where we're constantly in hyper arousal. And a huge part of my spiritual conditioning was really reconditioning my nervous system. As a result, now I have no stomach issues. I can eat pretty much whatever I want, though I do eat very similarly to you, but I can eat what I want. I digest perfectly. I haven't had to consider any form of, maybe I take digestive enzymes because they work and they're lovely, but that's it, man.
So you could go out and have McDonald's with an extra large helping of fries and a diet soda, and you'd still feel good?
I would digest it. I don't necessarily know I would feel great, but my digestion would be much more inclined to
I hear you.
Do you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I have enough stomach acid to break it down. Let's put it that way.
I hear you there. I am not going to experiment with that.
I'm not going to experiment with that by any measure, nor am I going to eat a chocolate bar. And it's not to say that if I ate it, I haven't had sugar in 8 years. So if I had a chocolate bar, I would have an extreme headache. If I had a hamburger from McDonald's, I would probably have some discomfort, but it wouldn't take me out for months.
That's the difference. And that's resilience right there. And there was a time when I'm almost scared of food like that because I know Totally. I want to show up for this week. And if I do that, I know the rest of the day is gone and I won't show up in my meetings. I don't even know what happened in them because it's like a drug. And to this day, I know the things that affect me and they're just not food, right? Mm-hmm. So I eat the milk protein. It turns into morphine for me and I'm literally drugged. I'm drooling on myself. It's not who I want to be.
That's right.
And so how would you recommend for the thousands of people listening right now? Okay, some of them know, like they've kind of hit rock bottom. They became aware that they, had an issue, whether it's any kind of addiction. And then there's others who are saying, I'm kind of healthy. I just want to be better, but maybe they haven't recognized, well, there's some health issues. But how do you guide people in your community to know, like, where are you on the spectrum? Where you're like, oh, I'm actually pretty resilient gut-wise. Like, I need to focus on forgiveness or whatever. Versus, like, no, you should go to town on fixing your gut. Like, how do you know where to start?
I want to really recognize the fact that you can go to town on fixing your gut, which I have done successfully time and time again. I mean, I cured myself of SIBO, which is sort of unheard of. I mean, people do it, but it's not an easy thing to get rid of. It takes a tremendous amount of work. And I did it, of course, with antibiotics, but also with 6 months of cooking my own food on the most insanely strict diet you could ever contemplate. I have cured candida. We should definitely do more gut conversations because I could write a freaking book on it. But that's not what I'm most proud of because I would cure the SIBO, but only 9 months later have reflux, or 6 months after that have some candida again. And so it was about creating a sustainable microbiome that could sustain my lifetime, not just these 6 months periods of my life. So that was only going to truly change when my nervous system changed, when my hyperarousal reactivity was no longer the common daily habit, when I was able to be resilient energetically. Because I cannot emphasize this enough, and I'm really glad that this is the direction that we went in, because I guarantee you 90% of the people watching right now are like, yes, I have gut issues. Yes, I have reflux.
It's so common.
It's so common, but it's the primary reason. Yes, food is a big reason, 100%, but stress is right next to the food.
Yeah, your vagal nerve controls digestion, and if you're in fight or flight, you will not digest well. Like it's just how it is.
There's actually a tool I can give your biohackers right now.
Yeah.
There's a tool called Vu chanting, which is about stimulating the vagus nerve to really talk to the viscera and allow it to regulate. And
you share.
Okay, here we go. So I like to place my hand on my belly for this, but you don't have to. That's not necessarily the technique. And the Vu chanting is almost like a foghorn, like a woo, like a guttural.
Okay.
Woo.
Like a really low woo.
And then so what's going to happen is you're going to take an inhale as your diaphragm contracts.
Everybody do this now. People look at you funny. That's okay. Do it anyway. Okay.
Inhale and allow your diaphragm to contract. So you're breathing. Inhale out. So your diaphragm is extending. Okay. Inhale out, yogic breath. Inhale out. And on the exhale, and once you've completed the inhale, you're going to immediately follow that inhale completion with an exhale of woo. And that's when your diaphragm will lightly contract. Okay. So then inhale out, filling up that balloon and really just taking every deep, sucking that breath in just gently and feeling all of that breath filling you. And once you get to that place where the breath is completely inhaled, you go back and you woo. What this does, the woo stimulates not only the vagus nerve and that self-regulation through the breath, but also that guttural woo chant starts to stimulate the viscera.
How many times do you have to do that?
I would say do it for 30 seconds, a minute, maybe
And
longer if it's
before
working.
meals when you wake up in the morning?
I would say do it. I do it when I notice my gut is entangled because of an emotion. So that's rare these days because I'm super steady right now in my life and I'm steady in my nervous system. But even sometimes I'll notice like a little tip with my husband or something like, you know. And so so now I have the consciousness of recognizing that kind of naughtiness, and then I'll woo, and it will just start to regulate. So it could be a fantastic thing to do before you eat. It could be a great thing to do when you notice that knot in your stomach.
What does your husband say when you start wooing?
He's given up on me. I mean, he thinks he thinks I'm completely nutbags. But you know, I'm sure your wife feels the same way about you.
Oh, never. She would never say such a thing.
She goes along with a lot of it though, so that's okay.
Totally, right? And if your spouse did everything that you did, it would be kind of boring anyway, right?
But you know, truthfully, he doesn't question me because he sees how much I've grown and how healthy I am today. He knows that I don't have stomach issues anymore that used to plague me and him because it would affect everything we ate. And I'm the chef in the household, right? It's really hard to live with somebody who's in a constant state of stress and tension and physical issues. And that is the response of most people with unresolved trauma, people with unresolved what happens often is that we have these times and experiences in our life where we go into this sort of arousal state of wanting to fight or flee, and that can get truncated. And when that gets truncated, we get stuck in that reaction, in that response. And in that response we pretty much relive that every single day, that constant state of not moving from full arousal out and through discharge. We just get stuck in the arousal. And that's a shitty place to live, man. You know it, I know it. And it definitely wreaks havoc on your body. And so we can't talk about biohacking if we're not going to talk about self-regulation. And that relates right back to spirituality because often spirituality is the gateway into regulating your nervous system. Because people may not have yet found their way to a therapist or neurofeedback or these kinds of practices that we can use just to really change the way our brain works and the way we react to things. But spiritual practices might be the first step through breath, through meditation, through prayer. These are all practices of soothing, self-soothing, surrendering, releasing, reprogramming your thinking and the ways that you've been trying to control your circumstances. You brought up manifesting at the top of this. The number one key to manifesting is to feel good, to feel resilient, to feel free in your body and in your mind.
I had a really hard time when I started down this path, even recognizing what a spiritual path was. I grew up in an atheist household, right, where spirituality wasn't really a part of the universe. What would you recommend as a first step for someone who says, I think maybe I should try a spiritual practice? Where do you go first?
Well, all of my work and every book I've ever written is all about helping people crack open to a non-denominational spiritual connection of their own understanding. And if that spiritual connection is related in some way to their religion, great, I don't care. But it's about establishing a spiritual connection of your own understanding and developing your own faith and developing what your words are and expanding your own spiritual lexicon so that it's just effortless for you to identify that you have your own belief systems. So that's where I would really start. If you hear the word spiritual and it takes you out, then just change what the word is. Call it intentions, call it connection, call it inspiration, whatever you want to call it. And I always say, Dave, I always say, I don't care what you call it. I care that you call upon it.
Oh, I really like that. And there's a whole bunch of felt sense that goes with spirituality. It's a feeling. And no one had ever mentioned that to me, or maybe they did, I just didn't hear it. So when I started doing personal development practice, I'm like, wow, I'm having these interesting feelings, but it took me a little while to figure out that they had value and that you could actually manage them and you could, control them and turn them up. What is a good practice for someone who says, all right, I know that there's some spiritual stuff that I do, but I don't have a lot of structure around it. Is there a direction? Like, should you look at breath work first? Should you look at chanting? Should you look at finding a guru? Or, there's this whole universe, and it's kind of confusing for people saying, I want to be more resilient. I want to feel like I've always got that thing with me. Where do you go once you're on the path in order to know that you're on the fastest path?
Well, I would say start with a prayer. And if you don't like the word prayer, you can call it an intention. Because when you send a universal message, when you just even set the intention for yourself, I'm willing to be guided to a spiritual path that's for me. You're opening up your conscious awareness to be led towards whatever it is that in this moment in time will be the most aligned with who you are. So a book will then fall off the shelf, or a podcast that you need to hear will just pop up as an ad, or a meditation will come in your Spotify cycle, or whatever. Literally, spirit universe works through technology in the most fascinating ways. So or you're even just listening to this right now and hearing, maybe I should really think about this. So it's not, I always believe that we don't actually have to go out and look for our spiritual path. When we become willing to be new, when we have that storyline or that voicing of, it has to be better than this, right? Or there has to be a better way, or I'm open to what that could be. That's when we start to literally have the guidance that's relevant to us planted in our face. And spiritual practices will come to you initially and continue to come to you in a form that you can relate to. So the majority of my audience, particularly early in my career, I started when I was 25 doing this work, and I'm 40, almost 41 right now. So when I was 25, my audience was like a bunch of 25-year-olds in New York City and LA and London and San Francisco. And they dressed like me and talked like me. And it was just this core audience of people because they identified and recognized themselves in me. And now as I've grown, that audience has grown, but it's still people who may relate to me as a teacher, right? And so if you're open to attracting that teacher that's relevant, it's also going to be someone who speaks in a language that's relatable to you, who has an energetic state that is relatable to you, and also that has what you want, right? I'm really going to erase the word guru from this conversation because it's a tricky word. It's actually, I wrote this entire Audible original called You Are the Guru, which is like, right. I am not your guru. Dave is not your guru. We don't want to be your gurus because when we fuck up, then your guru falls, right? So it's like, that is not a good, that's an idolization. But you can still be welcome to teachers. Because there's people who have lived practices, who have studied practices, who have developed practices that can be really relatable to you. So it begins with that prayer or that intention, whatever you choose to call it. And then from that place of intention, you're actually opening up your conscious awareness to receive the guidance that you need to develop that next right action towards your spiritual path.
You talked about serendipity, and you're saying, oh, the book falls off the shelf or something like that. And I completely did not believe in that, except that you actually can get much better at making serendipity happen in your life. At least I've noticed that. And I've literally had books fall off the shelf. I'm all by myself in a house, and Marcus Aurelius jumps off the shelf, not once, but twice in the same night, and opens up to a page. Like, maybe I should read that page. I don't know, because there's no mouse on the shelf. I can't explain it, but I'll just go with it, right? And maybe I'm completely nuts, but since I can't explain it, the harm in reading that page was nothing. So it's just, it took me a while to figure this out. But if people who don't know each other, if all three of them tell you over the course of a couple of weeks you should read a book, that's not random, right? You probably should read the book, right? And so I take note of those little things and allow that to come in. And it's really made a difference in my life. So I'm happy you mentioned that. It was kind of a part of what you're saying, but it made me think of that in my life. When has serendipity for you been a big deal? How has it happened somewhere in your life? Like, I can't believe that just happened.
Which story should I begin with? I mean, I have so many. I've written so many books on them. I live a life of serendipity, and I believe that that the more we open up our awareness to these types of principles, and the more spiritually conscious we become, the more synchronicity we receive in our life. I mean, life just becomes this groovy, oh my God, I was thinking about that. Holy crap, it's happening. Boom, boom, boom. It just is available. Early in my career, I was newly sober. I was starting to become a life coach at the time. I was getting on stages and giving talks, and I was developing what was my universal curriculum, and really first starting with me and my own personal growth. And I got the hit to become a student of a metaphysical text called A Course in Miracles. I'd been studying with my now friend Marianne Williamson, who at the time was just a mentor through her books. And I loved the concepts of A Course in Miracles. And so I went to the metaphysical bookstore that was down the street from my house on 14th Street in New York City. And I loved this bookstore. I mean, it's gone now, but it was so groovy. It was like crystals and like all the things that you would ever want when you walk into a metaphysical. It was like incense and just like all the groovy stuff. And I walked in, and as the universe would have it, A Course in Miracles is on display and discounted that day. Okay, so that's what I came in looking for. Boom, it's in my face. I walked towards the book to pick it up. And as soon as my hands touched the book, my hands went numb and got really, really warm. Wow. And it was as if the book lifted itself up and physically dragged me to the register. I put the book down, paid for the book. I walked out. I opened the book to a random page, and it said, "This is A Course in Miracles. This is a required course." I was like, okay, sign me up. And that was a beginning. That was like a huge, major step in my spiritual growth and development. So that's why it's like, you're going to be guided to exactly what you need, because it will just come through your mind. I should go read that book. Or Marianne Williamson was led to me through my first 12-step sponsor. And then all of a sudden, this is leading me to A Course in Miracles. And this is leading me down this journey of undoing my ego and developing a whole new way of being as a spiritual person. And so truly, I just, those stories are typical for me at this stage in my life. The veil between this world and the spiritual realm has lifted for me. And it's just a really fun way to live. You feel far less alone, and you feel so much more support.
I love it that you can put it so clearly and just talk about it. And you're a successful person. You know, you have a business and you write books and you do all that. I would ask you, when you're listening to this interview, to think about that. Are there times when you're saying that can't be random, but then the voice in your head says, "Oh no, that just had to be random. It just came out that way." It seems likely that we have the ability to change that. And I know some of the Course in Miracles people. I work with Jack Canfield and the people who wrote The Secret and all of that. These people have mad powers, right? Like stuff happens around them a lot, more so than statistics would say. I can't tell you exactly why, and I don't think Gabby can tell you why either, but I'll tell you, just consider what she's saying and say,
I can tell you why, Dave, I can tell you why.
Oh, you can tell me why? Okay.
I can.
You didn't tell me why on the podcast. Come on. All right. So tell me exactly why.
Okay. So we are all what I refer to as super attractors. Every single one of us. It's just that we forgot. And it's folks that you refer to as having these special powers, like Jack or whoever else, the people in The Secret, or Michael Beckwith, or whoever you admire and see that they're just constantly manifesting and so much greatness in their life. The only difference between that person and someone who's having a lot of blocks and struggles in their life is that person has devoted their life to tuning into inspiration, that they have committed to releasing the blocks to the presence of the awareness of that internal peace, joy, inner wisdom, inner guidance system, and for lack of a better word, inspiration. And so you, my friend, are a massive super attractor. And so while you may not fully identify as spiritual, but you definitely identify as someone on the personal growth.
I'm totally spiritual.
Okay.
I just didn't used to. Yeah.
So now you're spiritual. But even when you didn't identify as spiritual, you were a super attractor, because you would get a hit of inspiration and follow it. And when you'd follow that inspiration, it would just light you up, bring you joy, and then you'd reach for more of it. And then it would light you up and bring you joy, and then you'd reach for more of it. Am I correct about this? I'm imagining.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that bulletproof coffee and people drinking butter in their coffee would have happened out of anything but an inspired man's vision. Okay. Like that, if you hadn't had the fierce, I remember the first time I was sitting at a table with some marketing guy who I think was working with you at the time. This was way before you were bulletproof. And he's like putting butter in his coffee at this lunch. And I was like, what the are you doing? Like, what are you doing, man? And he's like, oh, I'm working with this guy, Dave. This is the next big thing, butter in the coffee. And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And then boom, the inspiration took hold. And here it is, this humongous mission-driven business. And that all is rooted in the source of inspiration that multiplied within you and continued to multiply around you. I guarantee that you will agree with what I'm about to say, that so many of the reasons for your successes are because divine synchronicities stepped in the path throughout your journey building this bulletproof business, I imagine.
I certainly see it that way. And there are a lot of people listening, though, who would say, there's no such thing as that. And what's frustrating as, someone with an aura ring and lots of tech is that we don't yet have the tech to measure that. But 25 years ago, we didn't have the tech to measure acupuncture meridians, yet we knew that acupuncture worked. At least all the practitioners knew. And then all the people who knew better that it didn't work because it couldn't work, because we didn't know why, they were mistaken. So I'm a little bit more seasoned now. And as a biohacker, look, you're allowed to hack a black box to change the input without knowing everything inside it, right? And for the people who say, I really have to have a mechanism of action, I'm like, okay, there's invisible leprechauns all around us and they're doing it. There, you have a mechanism of action, right? It might be wrong, but now do you feel safer, right? And so it drives me nuts that we can't quantify it yet. But I do see people doing really advanced work where we're probably going to be able to turn this on in less time and more quickly and increase our spiritual resilience. Before we wrap up our interview today, I'm really curious, specific for people who are experiencing, corona dreams, people who are really in the midst of pandemic fear, not knowing whether their cloth mask makes them sicker or doesn't, and, economic and just the whole chaos of all this. Any advice on how to be more spiritually resilient if you're caught up in that?
Yeah. I pray before I have to go into a doctor's office or before I have to go into the grocery store, whatever I have to do. I pray that I hold an invisible shield around me. I envision that mask is not only a actual physical barrier, but that it's a metaphoric barrier, that I am setting the intention to be supported, to be protected, to be guided. That is just a metaphysical approach to showing up and releasing the fear-based storyline, right? The other biggest thing I do is stay in the extreme appreciation for what I have right now, because anyone that's able to be part of this conference has something going right. Okay, you have internet access, you had enough money to pay for the ticket, or somebody gave you the ticket or whatever. So something is right in your life right now, okay? And obviously, even if you have the luxury of being a self-identified biohacker, something is going right in your life right now. So really, it sounds so classic of a spiritual teacher to be like, be grateful, but literally focusing so committed in such a committed and devoted and deep way to the appreciation of what you do have will help you be extraordinarily resilient through these tumultuous times. We owe it to ourselves to not sweat the small stuff anymore. It was holding us back forever, but now what's the freaking point? What's the point? With all the chaos and everything that's happening around us, the only thing we can do is be grateful in the moments and be present in the moments and be appreciative of the moments and relish in the moments. Because if we're not, then what the hell are we doing?
Gabby, I love that. And I want to thank you for being part of our faculty for the conference today. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and hear your take on things and just that infectious, positive nature that you have. Thank you for sharing it with our audience.
Thank you. I like being around you too.
All right, guys, next up, we're going to continue the conference. and you're going to just keep learning. And that's what it's about today, is learn and experience. And remember the different breaths you just learned about. Remember the VU breathing, and maybe you'll try that tonight before dinner. And if you can do it in front of your spouse and kids, if you have either or both, they'll just laugh at you. And then you get to be grateful that you brought laughter into the world. How could you lose?